Howdy my totally tubular gamers, and we are back for another ranking video, and today's ranking video is on the Red Faction series. Now if you like ranking videos, highly recommend you should sub. We're doing lots of ranking videos. Anyway, Red Faction is kind of a cult classic, honestly, as it got started in late 90s, early 2000s, and really went all the way to the early 2010s with a number of different games, and almost all of them were developed by Volition Software, who would also make Saints Row, and published by THQ, and now THQ Nordic. And well, the series has not really been talked about all that much since really 2010 or around there, but hopefully in the future it can come back. But as of this video, these are all the Red Faction games that have been released, so I thought, why not rank them? Let's rank every Red Faction game. Now we're going to be ranking these games on quality, obviously, and how destructible everything is, and how much fun you can really have with the game. Once again, these are my rankings, so this is just what I feel about these games, as I know that some people probably have a high amount of nostalgia for some of these and probably won't like my rankings. Either way, let's get started. What is the worst of the Red Faction games? And at the bottom of the list, we have Red Faction BATTLEGROUNDS. Now, Red Faction BATTLEGROUNDS is easily the most obscure Red Faction game. It's the only one not developed by Volition Software, and it's a really odd game, honestly. It really does not belong in the Red Faction series and is more of a spin-off, really, than anything else. The game is a top-down vehicular combat game, of all things. Every level just kind of has you dropped into an environment, and you just have to basically defeat everyone else in it. And there's a number of different classes and vehicles you can choose from in this game. However, this game really just doesn't do all that much, to be honest. It's very short, very limited in scope, and is really not very destructible at all. I mean, you can blow up the other cars, sure, but there really just isn't all that much to do with this game. Again, it is quite short, and I found it to be getting pretty bland pretty quickly, honestly. The controls are not amazing either, and I gotta say that the classes really don't feel all that different, which is kind of a shame. I wish there was more. And of course there's weapon pickups and other power-ups, but these really don't mix things up as much, and really pale in comparison to, say, like Twisted Metal. And even maybe that Monster Jam game might have been better, the destructible one, honestly. This game really, I don't have all that much to say about it. It's not very good. It's really not even talked about by any Red Faction fans at this point. And there's a reason. It's not that great. I know a lot of people might have nostalgia for this one, but here we have Red Faction 2. Now, Red Faction 2, I think overall is a pretty mediocre game, and really a big step backwards from the original Red Faction in almost every single way, actually. It was released around the PS2's launch, actually, and while the game did feature a number of cool things like multiplayer and destructible environments, air quotes, I think it's very subpar and lacking, especially when compared to the first game. The game's story has basically nothing to do with the first Red Faction, and I think is a big step back in almost every sense of the word. Like, it's a very mediocre, poor story, and while the original Red Faction didn't have a marvelous story, it was at least decent and easy to follow. This game is really not either of those. The destructible environments are very basic, as sure, it might lead to some cool looking destruction on like walls, but ultimately there is really no gameplay effect by the destructible environments. It's very basic, and it doesn't really affect the gameplay all too much at all, and I was really disappointed with that. The gunplay feels a lot worse than the original Red Faction, and the weapons feel a lot weaker, are a lot less cool and unique, and the game just doesn't feel as good. The game is around 3.5 hours, which definitely doesn't help it, and the game ultimately feels incredibly generic in almost every aspect. Like, it really just doesn't do anything unique for the most part. While it tries to kind of do something unique with those destructible environments, and even these vehicle sections, it really fails to, and it just doesn't get past functional. Like, that's really the ultimate level of the game's quality, is everything's functional and it works, but it doesn't do anything above that, and unfortunately that's what leads me to believing that the game is quite mediocre. And while there are some fun parts here and there, again, it isn't past functional and ultimately feels generic. The next game on our list is the latest Red Faction re-releases aside, and that is Red Faction Armageddon, the follow-up to the awesome Red Faction Guerrilla. Now, Red Faction Armageddon, I think, really looked at what Guerrilla did and decided to not improve on that and actually take a couple steps backwards, and ultimately just leads to a very forgettable again, mediocre shooter that doesn't really do all that much for shooting games or just Red Faction in general. But let me explain. The story stars Darius, a new character to the Red Faction series, and he messes up a couple times, basically, and everybody has to live underground in Mars. So everyone lives in these caves, and then he gets tricked again because he's a dumbass, and now an alien race basically shows up to try to wipe everyone out. And it's up to him to stop the aliens and try to get everyone back on Mars, I guess. But it's really not a very good story. Ultimately, it's very generic. The main character isn't very likable, and it just doesn't go anywhere interesting. Story aside, the gameplay also takes a similar amount of steps backwards from the previous game, as Guerrilla was really known for its open world, its destructible environments, and just sheer chaos that you could cause to everything. This game really does not have that at all in any sense. The game is a very linear third-person shooter with very few destructible environments. Most of the game is in these caves, and not only are these environments very boring and bland to look at, but they're very bland to play through as well, as there's very little destructible environments, and there's really, again, nothing to make collapse, there's nothing to blow up. Like, sure, here and there there's little areas that you can do that, and then at the end of the game when you leave the caves for a tiny bit that returns, but it's nothing compared to Guerrilla. It's not even a tenth of what Guerrilla did, and that's really disappointing. Because the game is so linear, you can actually build stuff back up, which is a cool feature, I guess, but it really just goes to show that the game is just too linear if that's the case. And the shooting is nothing to write home about. It really is just average, subpar, and gets the job done, and it's like, this doesn't really feel all that great. It doesn't do anything interesting, and the environments don't help it out either. The game just really fails to do anything interesting, and just kind of comes across as extremely flat and just generic. Maybe it's not fair to just compare it to Guerrilla, but I mean, it came out after, it's the same series, and then even on its own, it's really not that good of a game. Like, it's slightly better than Red Faction 2, I guess, but we're talking like tiny bit better. It's not even really worth talking about it in the grand scheme of Red Faction. It's just forgettable. It's very forgettable. And in the number 2 spot, we have the original Red Faction. Now, the original Red Faction is a total classic, and I think it's actually aged much better than you would think. The game really tried to be unique with its atmosphere, setting, and destructible environments, and I think the story is pretty decent. I mean, it's not like amazing or a masterpiece, but it gets the job done with its shitty voice acting and just general plot and progression of the story about the people rising up and being in the Red Faction. It's like this rebellion group, and the destructible environments are actually pretty good, especially for the time. This kind of stuff wasn't really seen in shooters all that much, and it actually serves a gameplay function, unlike Red Faction 2 where it's more of just a visual thing. Especially at the beginning of the game when you can blow these caves up to make shortcuts and stop stuff in its tracks and takes people off cliffs because you destroy the ground under them. That's really cool stuff. And later in the game you can use it to have shortcuts, or if an enemy's trying to hide behind cover, you can actually just blow the cover up and just or flank them by blowing up the wall to the side of them. It's really cool stuff. The gunplay is actually really quite good and still feels really good as well. Weapons like the rocket launcher and the C4, where there's just kind of destruction behind it, they feel really good to use, and again are engaging, and it's satisfying to just kill enemies with these things. It's actually really a good time. And while the game isn't the longest, at around 5 or 6 hours, I can say that's the longest on this list so far, but some of the pacing really isn't the best, as there is like this shitty stealth segment for some reason. I don't know why this is here. There's a couple questionable vehicle levels, and then there's also this cave full of shitty enemies. But I guarantee you the beginning of the game and the end of the game are the game's strongest points, where you're just blowing everything up and killing everyone, and it's a great time. The game really is a classic first-person shooter and really got the Red Faction name started into what it is today, and I don't think that the game is really paired up enough with other classic first-person shooters that came out around the same time, such as like Blood 2 or Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and I think it's pretty good. Sure, it might not be as good as like Return to Castle Wolfenstein, but it's still a really solid game, and again, it's a classic first-person shooter that I think anyone who likes shooters will enjoy. And in the number 1 spot in the best Red Faction game, you knew it had to be Red Faction Guerrilla. It's not even close. Red Faction Guerrilla is the best Red Faction game by a landslide, and is a fantastic game. Like, what a excellent game. I would say it's a once-in-a-decade kind of game, but it's like a once-in-a-lifetime kind of game at this point. This is like the game that really put Red Faction totally on the map, way more than the old games, into what it is today, which is a cult classic series, and for good reason, because Red Faction Guerrilla is just a fantastic time and is honestly one of my favorite games of all time. And THQ Nordic, the current holders of Red Faction, they know that. Which one did they bring to modern consoles? They brought Red Faction Guerrilla to modern consoles. Now, Red Faction Guerrilla is about my man Alex, who just goes to Mars to work and really just make an honest living. However, he finds out real quick that the EDF, the people in charge of running everything on Mars, are some real dickheads. They kill his brother, and well, Alex ain't gonna have that, so he joins up with the Red Faction rebellion group to take down the EDF, and it's all about destroying their shit. The story is basic and it's really well done, honestly. It's not anything extra, and I really can appreciate it, and it's a great setup because this game has you destroy everything. Like, when I mean everything, you can destroy legitimately everything in this game. It is, again, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of game. There has never been a game this destructible, and there probably never will be at this point. It is an engaging open-world experience where you just go around this map, destroying everything, completing missions for people where you usually just destroy everything. Like, when I mean everything, I mean you're tearing buildings down, you're destroying cars, you're killing people. It's like the whole 9 yards, and it's never been this satisfying in any other game. Like, when you tear shit up, you really tear it up. Like, you're given a sledgehammer to start off with, and this thing is amazing. You just go chunk by chunk into this building until you destroy all the lower level, and then it just collapses. You get stuff like rocket launchers where you can just shoot the rockets through the windows and just blow the walls up. You get this disintegrator gun where you can just straight make these like walls evaporate. Or maybe you're out of ammo, so what do? You just drive the car through the building and smash it that way. Like, it is so, there's so many options to destroy stuff, and there's so many unique ways to do it, and it's never not fun. Like, this is one of the most fun experiences I've ever had with a game, and with good reason, because you just are destroying everything. And sure, some stuff might not be the most amazing, like the shooting is pretty subpar, I'm not gonna lie, but why would you even bother with the shooting? Just blow up the environment around them. And a couple missions and side missions might not be the best, but it doesn't really hamper the experience at all, and it's just, again, an amazing time, and I've never not had a blast playing Red Faction Guerrilla, and I cannot recommend this game enough, because Red Faction Guerrilla really needs to be experienced by anybody who just likes video games, like, genuinely, as you'll never find a game where you can destroy this much stuff. We're more than 10 years after Red Faction Guerrilla, and we've never had a game come even close to the destructible environments that this game has, especially unscripted destructible environments. Games like Just Cause might have just as many explosions, but all of that is scripted. It's stuff that you're supposed to blow up, not just out of pure curiosity. And what's great about Red Faction Guerrilla, when you destroy something, it's gone. It doesn't come back later like when you drive back later. No, it's gone. There's like this kind of just save data for everything destroyed. It's gone for good unless you start a new game. Really great stuff. The Red Faction series isn't exactly the best. I'll be the first to admit that. But the games that are good are really good. And it seems that every time Volition struck gold, or at least struck diamond, or silver, or really any nice mineral, they kind of just messed up and dropped the ball right after. Red Faction 1 was pretty good, Red Faction 2 they messed up, Red Faction Guerrilla was really good, and Armageddon they just messed up, and then there's Battlegrounds, which we don't talk about. Either way though, I have no problem recommending Red Faction as a series. I think it's a really solid series. It's dirt cheap at this point, but if you're going to play any of them, you know it's got to be Guerrilla. Guerrilla just be the best. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about Red Faction. If you like ranking videos, please subscribe, and, have a good one. See ya.